Bibusa said, dear pana, obey, sir, we are odikamfo, titu, omampani, na uncrophone na betumi, ediwachi, nania, oyeno, omodi, and aye. Na edu baby na se ye ka se enye sika yituama timamufo ne dibu maya ya na nipa bi nti ase senka Ghana ye betumi ajai sa suban na dia nka bebo o man Ghana pa se ye koto aba sika ye sen no ho ni nyina ne se ono ankasa nim se ne suban no enye ntisi wantue sika obia no eni nachi se wo hwe ne ekoso wo Burkina Faso a se bibia no aye nwanwa ema akanya obia ene mabesia ene jaidi omo ye bia no epia bontin se e wo se ye kuroyi na se wo hunu we na France 40 baby se omo ba beje Burkina Faso afri Ibrahim Traoré nsem efri se Ibrahim Traoré hyeso o hye wo mo so na abibifo ibi nso ene na ya adwen but o hwe dodo na wo man no mu no a wo mo ahunu ye se obama o man no enti e wo se omomu a na omo wa yibi mi wiye bi a mehwe papa bi a odisment ba koto ne bicycle so every different chiri ba se enyuma pa Ibrahim Traoré oye no ono so ne fam dia obetumi aye ni akanya wo man no nyasem kitwa akanya wo man no enti leaders ni tie se wo ya de papa na untue sika mame ansan baba besom ba mo amonim yese kwan ya monam so nya papa enti no ane ana mo disika sem edi bonim anka mbesua de ekoso Burkina Faso ya anka bebo apa
Just bare hands, sun-scorched skin, and a prayer in every shovel. In Burkina Faso, 20,000 women have left their kitchens, markets, and classrooms to build a nation brick by brick, with no contracts, no begging, and no fear. And walking beside them, not above them, is a leader who did not ask for miracles, but demanded dignity. His name is Captain Ibrahim Traoré. This is not charity. This is not a miracle. This is Africa, unfiltered. Before we continue, hit subscribe if you believe we deserve to tell our story in our own words. Comment truth if you're ready to unlearn what they told you about us. At dawn in Wahiguya, the city is quiet, but the roads are already alive. A group of women gathers under a neem tree, their heads wrapped in brightly colored scarves, their feet dusty, their hands calloused. One by one, they lift shovels, buckets, and bricks. Some of them are grandmothers. Some are students. Some are mothers who breastfed their babies only hours ago. But now they all walk the same path to the construction site. There is no paycheck waiting, no contract signed, no promise of reward. What drives them is something far deeper, the conviction that Burkina Faso belongs to them, not to the donors, not to the warlords, and certainly not to the ghost of colonizers past. Across the Sahel, while many wait for relief packages or foreign development grants, these women rise. What began as a few groups patching rural roads has become a groundswell. Over 20,000 women have now joined. They pour concrete, they lift stones, they dig drainage canals, they repair broken school fences. Some of them learned to build by watching YouTube videos. Others learned from the hands of their own mothers who once built mud huts when no one else would. Adama, a 62-year-old vendor who once sold peanuts in the market, now leads a road repair team. She said, "I used to sell in the shade of trees. Now I lay stones so our daughters can walk to school without stepping through mud and shame." What the world calls extreme poverty, they call raw power. And standing behind this movement silently, steadily, is Captain Ibrahim Traoré, who made no speeches about glory, but simply declared, "We will build this country with our own hands." He did not command them to build. He inspired them to believe they could. Burkina Faso latest news no longer begins with bombs or debt. It begins with bricks and women. It begins with faith. In the dusty villages of Koudougou and the red plains of Banfora, the same rhythm repeats. Women gather. They work. They sing. And as the sun climbs, they rest under thatched roofs, sharing tea made with baobab leaves and millet cooked in large iron pots with a handful of salt. Each woman contributes a spoonful of grain. No one eats alone. No one eats first. As one elder says, we are not just building roads. We are building trust again. Some say it is madness, and perhaps it is. But as one volunteer named Miriam said, you cannot rebuild a broken house with logic alone. You need belief. You need the madness of hope. Still, this movement was not born out of ease. It was born out of betrayal. After years of failed promises, foreign aid that vanished into luxury compounds, and soldiers who claimed protection, while terror rose, the people stopped waiting. They decided to act. They watched the speeches from foreign capitals. They read the press releases that called Burkina Faso a fragile state. But what they saw on the ground were children who needed safe roads to get to school, elders who needed clean paths to the clinic, and markets that needed drainage to avoid disease. So they asked one simple question. If not us, who now across the continent, whispers are turning into words. In Kenya, a youth collective posted, "If Burkina Faso can rise, so can we." In Mali, radio hosts are broadcasting updates from the construction brigades as if they were national heroes. In Niger, women's associations are writing to their governments asking, why are we still begging while they are building? The world may not understand this revolution, but Africa does. This is not infrastructure. It is resurrection. And now we ask you, they built roads with bare hands. What would you build? If money wasn't the reason, only love was, write your answer below. And tag someone who still believes real change is impossible, because this is only the beginning. Hope may rise like the sun, but it always casts a shadow. As the story of the 20,000 women spread beyond the borders of Burkina Faso, so did the discomfort of those who had long claimed to be saviors. Western media outlets, usually silent on stories from Ouagadougou, suddenly found their voices. But their headlines did not read "Women Build Nation." They read "Concerns Rise Over Unpaid Female Labor in Africa." In Geneva, at the headquarters of the Global Civic Support Foundation, a press briefing was held by Miss Evelyn Caldwell, a seasoned policy analyst who had spent 2 decades supporting African development through structured grants and consulting missions. Her words were measured but sharp. While grassroots efforts can be inspiring, replacing state responsibility with informal labor is a dangerous precedent. What we are seeing in Burkina Faso might look noble, but it risks exploiting women, masking poverty with patriotism. Development must be professionalized. This is not sustainable. The video clip went viral. Some clapped, but across West Africa it burned like salt on an open wound. Adama, the peanut vendor turned road worker, watched the video on a neighbor's cracked smartphone. She stood in silence, then said, "If they think dignity is exploitation, then they have never walked barefoot to bury a child who died from a flood." The backlash was not just from think tanks. A coalition of international NGOs quietly pulled back their funding, citing concerns about labor practices. Aid channels slowed. A few United Nations representatives issued vague statements about monitoring the situation, but on the ground the bricks did not stop moving. In fact, the criticism fueled the fire. On local radio stations in Kaya and Dedougou, callers denounced the hypocrisy. One woman said, "When we were dying from hunger, they said we lacked initiative. Now that we act, they say we are unprofessional." Burkina Faso latest news began trending on regional networks, not because of another coup or tragedy, but because of women with calloused hands and unshakable resolve. Ibrahim Traoré responded not with a press conference, but with presence. He visited a construction site in the Nord region. No cameras, no stage. Just dust, sun, and the quiet rhythm of shovels hitting soil. There he met Miriam, the woman who once said hope required madness. She handed him a trowel and said, "They say we are being used, but we know who is using who." Traoré smiled, knelt beside her, and helped mix concrete. The next day, he issued a simple statement. Sustainability does not come from handbooks. It comes from hands. These women are not unpaid laborers. They are unpaid leaders. Meanwhile, across the continent, the ripples began to move faster. In Kenya, university students staged a solidarity construction day building footpaths in informal settlements, tagging photos online with "One hour we build too." In Mali, the Women's Council of Bamako sent a letter to Traoré stating, "Your women have become our teachers." In Niger, state media began covering Burkina Faso's initiative not as a curiosity, but as a case study. But not everyone in Burkina Faso stood united. There were murmurs in the capital. Some elites accused the government of manipulating poor women for political optics. A few male leaders complained that men were being pushed aside. In one viral post, a former minister wrote, "This is not feminism. This is chaos." But for the women on the ground, the noise of criticism was drowned by the rhythm of building. Every stone laid was a rebuttal. Every sweat-soaked shirt was an answer. At one site, a grandmother named Fatuma was asked by a foreign journalist, "Do you feel used?" She laughed. "Of course, used by God to do something great." This is the kind of madness the world cannot measure. A madness that cannot be funded, analyzed, or approved. A madness that remembers something older than development models, something rooted in the soil. And so we ask again, if your freedom depended on your hands, would you still wait for permission? Or would you pick up a shovel? Comment "Amen" if you feel this fire. Let's fill this comment section with "Amen" rise in the names of women we honor. Because even when the world says no, Africa remembers how to say yes to herself. They thought it was chaos, but it was a blueprint. While critics called it unorganized, Ibrahim Traoré was designing something the world had not seen before, a new model of African development rooted not in debt but in dignity. And like any revolutionary plan, it did not start on a whiteboard. It started in the dust. Traoré did not announce a national volunteer program with fanfare. There were no international forums, no donor pledging sessions. What there was silence. And in that silence, something ancient awakened. The idea was simple but radical. If colonialism broke Africa's spine through dependency, then the only way to stand again was to build with one's own hands. And so instead of asking for loans, Traoré asked for time. Instead of seeking grants, he sought faith. He walked into rural provinces not to deliver aid, but to ask a question: what would you do if no one was coming to save us? The answers came in shovels and sweat. Soon, Burkina Faso latest news became not about insurgency or starvation, but about school walls, rising bridges, reconnecting villages and roads that had not seen repair in 30 years now, echoing with the footsteps of women. The Ministry of Infrastructure was restructured to work with communities not above them. Engineers were dispatched not as overseers, but as teachers. They trained grandmothers in surveying. They handed measuring tapes to teenage girls. Masons taught mothers how to mix cement with precision. By March 2025, over 500 women had been trained in masonry, carpentry, and public works logistics. Some now lead their own cooperatives. Others have started teaching new waves of volunteers. This was not just construction. This was resurrection. Traoré's strategy did not just defy old economics. It rewrote them. In a confidential memo leaked from the IMF's West Africa division, analysts expressed serious concern that Burkina Faso's shift towards civic-based labor would erode reliance on structured financial packages, potentially influencing other fragile states to follow suit. They were right to worry, because in Togo, students began gathering in abandoned fields, planning cleanup drives and road repairs without government permission. In Côte d'Ivoire, a group of market women wrote a letter to their mayor: "We do not need your money. We need your permission to start." In Benin, artists began painting murals of Burkinabe women holding shovels like torches. The fear among institutions was not chaos. It was contagion. One European diplomat was overheard saying, "Traoré is not a threat because of what he does. He is a threat because people believe they can do it too." That is the most dangerous kind of leadership, the kind that replicates. At the heart of this blueprint was a spiritual logic, not a fiscal one. In one of his few public sermons, Pastor Emmanuel of Bobo Dioulasso said what the IMF calls informal, God calls intimate. These women are not just working. They are reclaiming creation itself. And reclaim it they did. In the village of Sapui, a woman named Awa began drawing diagrams in chalk to plan a water drainage system. When asked if she had training, she replied no. But I watched the engineer last week and I prayed on it last night. I believe my hands can follow what my spirit sees. In Ouagadougou, churches began dedicating Sunday services to builders of hope. At mosques, imams praised those who lift stones as worship. Even animist elders poured libations over gravel piles, praying for the safety of their daughters on the work sites. Faith was no longer a thing of temples. It was a thing of trenches. Burkina Faso latest news became a liturgy. Broadcasts of volunteers finishing roads were played between traditional music and weather reports. News anchors called it the people's prophecy. But this was not just about one country. This was about a people remembering who they were before they were told who to be. And so now we ask, they eat together, they cry together, they build together. Would you walk a mile with them, even in spirit share this with someone who carries your hope? Tag a sister, a daughter, a mother who inspires you. Because this is not just a movement, it is a model, a map, a mirror, and maybe maybe it is the path we were always meant to walk. It started with the sky. Heavy clouds rolled over the plains of Sangier like bruises forming across the body of a tired land. The air thickened. Chickens scattered. Old men on wooden stools looked to the west and whispered the same word, Ayire, the storm is coming. No one expected it to come this strong. By nightfall, the winds howled like ancestors crying warnings. Then came the rain, not the kind that dances on rooftops, but the kind that tears them apart. In the northern province of Zondoma, a newly repaired rural road collapsed under the weight of floodwater. A trench filled too fast. A mother carrying her child slipped and fell. The baby was swept away. His name was El Haj. He was 3 years old. The women who built that road were the first to arrive. They wept. They prayed. They blamed themselves. Across the country, word of the incident spread like wildfire. Online trolls mocked the volunteer movement as reckless. Foreign critics returned with a vengeance. This is what happens when you let untrained civilians do professional work, a headline read from a Paris-based development journal. Even some voices within Burkina Faso hesitated. Have we gone too far? One local official asked. Should we pause? But the women, the very ones who mixed the cement, who carried gravel barefoot, did not pause. They mourned. Then they picked up their tools again, because they knew the difference between failure and fragility. What collapsed was not their will. It was just a road. At sunrise, as villagers gathered for a silent prayer, a battered motorcycle approached from the distance. No convoy, no security detail, just one rider in a dusty green jacket. It was Ibrahim Traoré. He stepped off the bike and walked straight to the site where the mothers stood in silence, some still soaked from the night before. He knelt. He did not speak at first. Then he touched the mud, the broken gravel, and said, "They did not fail. We failed to protect them. From now on, every woman who builds with our full power behind her." That same afternoon, a decree was issued. Every volunteer site would now be equipped with protective gear. Government engineers would conduct structural reviews. Medical teams would visit each region weekly. A national insurance fund for community laborers would be established. The country responded not with applause, but with quiet resolve. In churches, pastors spoke of El Haj as a martyr of rebirth. At mosques, his name was added to the prayer of Friday remembrance. In schoolyards, children drew pictures of women with shovels beside angels. In the city of Fada, a grandmother named Yeniga said, "We lost one child, but saved thousands more, and we will not stop." That same week, international media ran two different stories. One, Burkina Faso's volunteer model collapses amid tragedy. Two, President Traoré pledges reforms after infrastructure disaster. But neither headline captured the truth, because the women never asked for headlines. They asked for a country that would not forget them when the rains came, and this time it did not. Burkina Faso latest news was no longer about survival. It was about responsibility, and above all, resilience. In a courtyard in Ouagadougou, women gathered that evening holding candles in a circle. A little girl named Fati, who had helped carry bricks with her mother the week before, whispered to the flame, "We build again tomorrow." "Right, Mama." Her mother nodded, and around them dozens of others whispered the same word. "Yes, so we ask you now, would you build for love, even if it meant risking the storm? What legacy would you leave if the future depended on your hands? Tell us below. Because faith is not the absence of storms. It is the will to build between the rains. The world expected silence after the storm, but Burkina Faso answered with a roar. Within days of the flood, something changed, not just in headlines, but in spirit. In the village of Dano, where red earth meets rice fields, women who had never lifted a hammer before gathered at dawn. Not because anyone told them to, not because they were paid, but because they had seen the mothers of Zondoma build, fall, and rise again. One woman, 62 years old, arrived with a walking stick in one hand and a brick in the other. Her name was Mariama. When asked why she came, she simply said, "If I do not stand now, I will sit forever." That same week, a group of teenage boys in Gawa skipped school not to run from education, but to run towards something greater. They joined a local site working under the sun, their shirts soaked and their voices chanting a new anthem. We are the mortar of our mother's dreams. In Ouagadougou, artists took to the streets. Walls once covered in campaign slogans now bore new murals. Women with wings of steel shovels turned into swords, baobab trees with roots made of human hands. These were not just paintings, they were declarations. And then beyond the borders, the ripple began. In Niger, women in Niamey formed what they called the Sisters of the Soil. In Togo Street, vendors pooled money to buy bags of cement for rural schools. In Kenya, university students launched a campaign, Books and Bricks Study, by night, build by day. The hashtag Notre Burkina Faso latest news was no longer about crisis. It became a digital drumbeat, a way to say, look.
Wahwe mfonino na we de yebese Ghana ni bia sua de efri mfoni a wahwe emma bebe 20,000 say emenya mfunso a ena atiasi Burkina nkronim brono so say ni Ibrahim Traoré ye na ye omofe inti hese omo nso de omo ahoden eboa yentua omo ka yentua omo ka Ghana de na yesua firi we mu Ibrahim Traoré emfre wo mu on share wo mu se soja ban babia obi apie na be adwuma omo firi omo pem ena eye de bebe o man akonanimu Tigana politicians me kama na awura modwemu se ya na nipa na ti o man ni mu no nhia musika saa o nia aye fia ye koto aba na gise mo hwehwe sika gu o ansa eno na ya na mo ya na ya nhwe ya ni ya no kwakopa se Burkina Faso soja ni na ye we dia ene senka soja edi yeso ankaye na everyze ni omo ye enye party bi asem omo gina hot se Burkina Faso enti abibi for the sa democracy no ameboye ni o mumi anti asiasa ni ati asiasa ebeboye ameboye we is a party bi na kwaya encampment no baby obidi bi fa baby odi kogu baby amane party for bahwe akoma omode yadwuma asima mi bi ewo mfie adiosia de naya ne ya kutapuma obon musa se madam na so yare o se wan sorry obekoso ayare na nia omu eye ne ye ne fe. It is all about good leadership and a faithful leader. I mean, found repino, my main can't be intro. Subania, a master way of Dicania, a Kenya uncle for duachi. And he said, Ubaya Ubia, service minded. The unmotivated or mining now that motivation is service minded. Because omo hu ye say nipa na wodi oman nanim opo oman ye. Omo hu pefe say na da bia nenimu. Service minded. A faithful leader puts others before themselves. Ghana hayenye hu bi afi na yema mpani otisi kwa mu bank akra. They lead by service. They lead by serving. So now obi a oye okandifu papa no. Na osom adwen na woni tirim. Nya se oba na kai si di na ni moto di na ni mu nyasem ketwa. Nia ope bibi aye ne man no. Sa niema we nyina no hwehwa gu baabi. By serving, protecting, and uplifting others. Those under his care. Now, oba ye school ye free. E ma kwa wo so a o se wo ye Burkina Faso. Nyame ye wadum na fafura. Ko hospital bia be ko bia no. Wo wi a pro ho na brefi. Na ebe den na nkenya wo. Ye man pani bosha waka say level 100 bia no obetua no. Hwese ne school for na niji e. Enti se obeye o man pani na wadwen ni se wo ye de timamufo ho beto na anya nhye o ton anya sikatua o ton na onni ye no ema dom esori di wachi. Enti yehunu we se Ibrahim Traoré ye visionary, a man of vision. They lead with clear purpose. They live with clear purpose. Just say, akora bit me interpret their own way. Focus on long-term growth and righteousness, not short term. Omu yankrofo a de omu ye bia na ka bibi kire nipa na ati o man mu. Anu kwasem ni Ibrahim Traoré o de bibi aba Africa. Ibrahim Traoré abia bie niema bia na ye bibifo yesu ni ye ban na amayosem bekum saade ni nyina. Now what we are seeing at Burkina Faso is the spirit of Africa. That's the spirit of Africa. But unfortunately, the so-called democracy has killed the spirit of Africa. And now uko kurasi krani bode urukura nkrofo mpiema. Because wahine no beba so na waton ho nsase ni nyina na wa bibia no ye ne dia. Na assembly men for kra no agi omanity a won ani ase. Enti odimu se sa odo a ye wo ma ye man no na yira. Padon se nipa baako. Osi Burkina Faso duru kwasiada and so no bi etia bontin kokoye adwuma. Osi emabesia omonye construction adwuma da o. Ena womo tu omo agu a asi wonma omo ye adwuma achi sei. Besi asem we sei na eduru ba bia na wo nimdie bia na manfo nje ntimo, then you keep to yourself. But see, yana me can say it's all about leadership. Oh yes, yani a team. It is true. But here then na nipa ti o many one say. Because baby emre nie no nipa ye on ne ye ti se moa. Baby emra enye djuma no. Baby emra ye won krofo edi won ne won krofo eni wo omo afi na jinse mo. Nti Burkina Faso nya di suama Africa. Why na adwin na odwin da se Kenya bi pa bema Africa sori agyan na so ebeba ebefiri Burkina Faso. Who have ever thought that if revival or reformation will come to Africa, will start for Burkina Faso? Burkina Faso was one of the poorest nations, not even in Africa, but in the world. But now, Burkina Faso is proving beyond doubt. And on the map, people are seeking where can we find Burkina Faso? Because of one person. Because of good leadership. Because of his faithfulness. He's a man of accountability. A man who thinks the future of his nation. This is a leader Africa needs. We any okan before here. Ne da yamiasi. Enti bompa ye man why? Pray for him and stand with Ibrahim Traoré. Nyame inshallah so nyambre atie no ahwe. Ebe se eye disua wo saka bomodian se wo be sha ma Ghana ni bia nsaka na akanya ye. Na yansu yatumi apagye ma yasi wono. Radi inshallah. Mo ene hwe ne tie. Bye bye.